Your chest tightens, as if invisible hands are pressing down on it. Your stomach twists into a knot and heat floods to your face and ears. You feel exposed, like your armor has fallen off and everybody can suddenly see how much you actually suck. You want to shrink yourself, make yourself as small as possible, or even better, disappear entirely. Shame. We all know it. Sometimes it can feel so heavy, it physically hurts. 1.5 years ago, I failed on television, in front of millions of people. I've never felt shame that intense before. Like many of us, I've always had a close relationship with shame. Being dyslexic and very likely also having undiagnosed ADHD, I felt different. I'd often forget things, I'd mess up a lot. I struggled to finish tasks, had trouble focusing and sitting still, and often got sent out of class because of it. I felt like I was less than others, less smart, less competent, less interesting. I felt like no matter how hard I tried, I could never quite get it right. And all of that festered in my unconscious and created the feeling of not being good enough. With that came the obvious desire to hide my not good enoughness. So every time I messed up and felt like my shortcomings were exposed, I'd become overwhelmed by this feeling of shame. I've come a long way when it comes to shame. I learned to lean into it, and funnily enough, I rarely ever feel it now. In this video, I will tell you about my experience with shame and take you with me on the journey of how I overcame it, so you can overcome yours too. Shame is probably one of the most uncomfortable emotions that we can feel. But why do we feel it, and what triggers it? To start, I want to make the distinction between shame and guilt, because they're often used interchangeably, but they're actually very two distinct things. Guilt focuses on behavior. It tells you that you did a bad thing. Shame focuses on identity. It says you are bad. I've heard people talk about healthy shame, but I would argue that shame is never healthy. Because when something gets attached to our identity, which it does with shame, it becomes very hard to change, or way harder at least. Guilt, however, can be very valuable and even necessary. If you steal from a friend, for example, or cheat on your partner, guilt can move you in the right direction again. It can let you know that you acted out of line with your values or the moral code of your group or in society. Something important I want to add to that is that feeling guilt or shame doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong. I work with many people, often women, that experience intense guilt the moment that they sense they're even the slightest bit inconvenient for someone else. I once had a client who felt incredibly guilty after suggesting to eat dinner on the balcony with her boyfriend. They did. It was lovely, but afterwards she felt terrible, thinking that maybe he actually wanted to eat inside, and I didn't even ask him what he wanted. That kind of guilt isn't about values or doing harm. It's about self-preservation and avoiding rejection. Because guilt and shame make us feel like we did something wrong, we often believe that feeling points to some objective truth, even if that's not at all the case, like with my client in the example. That brings me to the purpose and the origins of shame. You know that critical voice in your head that constantly tells you about everything that's wrong with you. She tells you that your nose is too big, that your stomach's too fat. She thinks you're a bad friend, that you talk too much or too little, that you're too sensitive or not sensitive enough. She is the cause of your shame. And while it might seem like she's trying to destroy you, she's actually trying to do the opposite. She wasn't always there. It's not like we're born with an inner critic. When you were a baby, you weren't even aware of yourself, let alone others' perceptions of you. There was no ego to protect yet. But as you grew up, you learned that you're not just good the way that you are. You have to obey to certain rules. You learn that some of your behavior, leads to praise, attention, and love, while other behavior causes rejection, judgment, or punishment. This is the moment that our inner critic comes into our lives. When we're children, or even in earlier human history, rejection meant our death. A child can survive without its parents, just like a tribe member couldn't survive if it was casted out of the group, forced to face the dangers of the jungle alone. As a result, our system has become very, very sensitive to rejection. So much so that when we feel rejection or shame, the same area of our brain activates as when we're in physical pain. All of us have these internal rules of how we should and shouldn't be. Rules that you unconsciously created throughout your life. And I often describe the inner critic as the policeman or woman that makes sure you adhere to your internal rules. And shame is her weapon of choice to make sure you act in line, you stay in check. Okay. You now know what shame is and why we feel it. So now you're probably wondering, how the hell do I get rid of it? To learn how to overcome your shame, I first want to talk about the unhealthy and paradoxical ways in which we often try to overcome it, by looking at psychologist Donald Nathanson's shame compass. Nathanson's shame compass identifies 4 unhealthy coping mechanisms we tend to rely on when our shame gets triggered. Withdrawal, avoidance, attacking the other person, or attacking ourselves. I'll go over each of them and explain how you can overcome them in a healthy way. The first unhealthy coping mechanism I want to talk about is withdrawal. Withdrawal happens when we start to believe that our shame is justified, that it's proof that something is wrong with us. So to protect ourselves from feeling it, we pull away. We isolate, avoid people, and stay away from situations that might trigger that shame. It's avoiding or cutting off a friend after she criticized your behavior. It's saying no to new opportunities because you're afraid to fail. Or choosing to work out at home, for example, because you feel ashamed of your body. Even though you'd rather be at the gym. In the moment, withdrawal feels safer. But over time, it leaves us more isolated, more alone, and it cuts us off from growth and connection to others. The very things that we need to heal that shame in the first place. Paradoxically, when we avoid the things we're ashamed of, the shame usually doesn't go away. Instead, it goes underground, and it grows and slowly eats away at us. In the beginning of the video, I told you about my failure on television. In the Netherlands, we have this television program called Kamp van Koningsbrugge, where they put 15 civilians through commando training. And I'd been wanting to join the program for years. And in 2024, I finally did. I'd gone through interviews, physical and psychological tests, and I was selected out of more than 1,000 applicants. I was so thrilled to be on this television program, and I thought this was my opportunity to finally prove myself, prove that I was good enough. But that didn't happen. Even worse, I dropped out first. And I've never felt such heavy shame and disappointment before. The image of myself I had so carefully protected my entire life, of the girl that would always push and challenge herself, the girl that never gives up, always gives it her all, that fell apart. And it was like the whole world was going to see how weak and incompetent I actually was. Like, the thought of that just made me feel sick. And even worse, I couldn't legally talk about the program or how far I came with other people before the episode was aired. And to be really fair, I also had no desire to talk about it. I wanted to hide away and just forget that it happened. For months, I lived with this pit in my stomach, dreading the day that the episode would air and no one would look at me the same. When the program announced the contestants on their social media, weeks before the first episode aired, people started sending me messages about how they were rooting for me and knew that I was going to get far. And my inner critic had the time of her life. When the episode finally aired weeks later, I wanted nothing more than to crawl in my bed and stay hidden for some months. I literally had to force myself to watch the episode. But to my surprise, instead of hate messages and people that were disappointed in me, something else happened. People were sending me messages of how proud they were of me and how they could have never done it themselves. They sent me loving and encouraging messages that made me feel less alone in my shame. And it taught me that our inner critic is often 1,000 times more critical than the people around us are, especially the people that love you. Shame lives in the shadows. The moment the thing I was most ashamed of was put into the light, literally on television, for everybody to see, it lost its power over me. Shame is a social problem with the social solution. You cannot intellectualize yourself out of shame. You can't sit by yourself and resolve it. The way out of shame isn't locking yourself into your room and never putting yourself out there. It's about confronting the things that make you feel vulnerable and finding the people that love and appreciate you for who you are. That brings us to the second coping mechanism, avoidance, which in my opinion could be better described as numbing. It includes behaviors such as overeating, doom scrolling, drowning yourself in work, drinking, or using drugs to make the shame and guilt go away. Very often, we're not even aware that these types of behaviors are numbing shame and this negative experience of ourselves. Numbing also creates a positive feedback loop, because the numbing behavior only gives you a temporary relief of the shame. And because the numbing behavior itself leads to more shame, you have to engage in more numbing to set off the shame that was caused by the numbing behavior itself. And like that, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Like every teenager, I was quite insecure in middle school. Parties and other social gatherings were the cause of quite a bit of anxiety. I always felt like other girls were more fun and more interesting than me. And on top of that, I was horribly aware of my own discomfort, while also believing that everybody else was just enjoying themselves without being so terribly self-aware. I know better now, of course. But when I got to a party, I'd immediately start drinking, and I didn't stop until I reached my desired level of drunk, which was whatever level would make me not give a fuck anymore. And I felt like I was relying on alcohol more and more to make me feel comfortable. Until once again, I was done with my own bullshit. The benefits we perceive alcohol gives us aren't benefits at all. Alcohol doesn't make us more confident and relaxed. Instead, it makes us believe that we can only have these things if we hurt our health in return. Alcohol gives us a temporary relief of uncomfortable feelings, only for those feelings to come back stronger after the alcohol has worn off. When it comes to numbing, the way out again is confrontation. But while overcoming withdrawal asks you to confront things outside of yourself, like other people or situations, here the situation is confrontation with yourself. I stopped drinking at parties. And while in the beginning I often felt anxious and insecure, over the years my confidence actually grew and I started to feel more and more comfortable in social settings. By quitting alcohol, I gave myself the opportunity to actually work on my challenges and social skills. And now I love social gatherings and I feel very comfortable in them. And that brings us to the third coping mechanism, attacking the other person. We reduce the other person's worth so we can feel better about ourselves and relieve some of the shame. A beautiful girl walks into the room and she's dressed to impress, and it makes you feel ashamed of your own outfit. So to ease some of the shame, you whisper to your friend, how self-absorbed the girl is, and that she must be looking for attention and male validation. Or your partner tells you that they didn't appreciate something that you did. Guilt starts to creep up, so you quickly turn it around and attack them. You didn't do anything wrong. They're just too sensitive. The paradox is that by trying to avoid feeling rejected in this way, we tend to create more of it, not less. When you and your friends often gossip about other people, it probably makes you overestimate the likelihood that other people, or even your own friends, are also talking negatively about you. Or when every time you feel guilty or ashamed, you start attacking the other person to protect your own image and feeling of self-worth, the other person will likely not want to hang out with you after a while. When you have the tendency to attack other people when your shame is triggered, the solution can be found in compassion, appreciation, and repair. Instead of talking the girl down because her appearance feels like a threat to you, try meeting that moment with compassion for yourself and for her. You might think, I can feel my insecurity showing up right now, and that's okay. Then, rather than projecting it outward, you can choose appreciation. She looks gorgeous, and she clearly put effort into her outfit. Even if her style isn't your taste, you can still acknowledge the confidence or the creativity behind it. When your partner tells you that something you did hurt them, compassion means staying open instead of getting defensive. It means reminding yourself that both of you are human and trying your best. Appreciation in the situation could look like recognizing your partner's honesty and their willingness to have a difficult conversation with you to benefit the relationship. And lastly, repair means learning to understand each other's needs without finger pointing and finding a solution that works for both of you. Attacking others may protect your ego for a moment, but compassion protects your relationships and connections to others. Where shame builds walls, compassion builds bridges. That gets us to the last coping mechanism, which is attacking ourselves. This happens when we see our shame as deserved and turn our anger inwards. It often shows up as harsh self-criticism, self-blame, or even self-disgust. We tell ourselves that we are not good enough, or that we deserve to feel this way. And this kind of inner attack only deepens the shame and makes it harder to break free from. Rather than withdrawing, when we attack ourselves, we endure the shame for the sake of trying to maintain a relationship. But it comes at a cost. We tolerate this shame and try to please others. We put their needs and opinions above our own and constantly adapt our behavior just to avoid feeling rejected and decrease the likelihood of future shame. When we keep adapting ourselves, we also rob ourselves of the opportunity to see that our beliefs about ourselves might not be true. In primary school, I started believing that I was dumb. When I was about 7 or 8, I had this teacher that didn't particularly like me. And she even told my parents that I would never amount to much. And I think I felt that. Me needing extra reading classes at the time for my dyslexia also didn't particularly help with this belief. And this is a belief that has stuck with me for most of my life. And I've spent a lot of time trying to hide what I believe were my intellectual shortcomings. I would educate myself on topics I didn't really care about because I was afraid of getting into a conversation about something that I knew nothing about. And I would feel anxious. It sounds stupid saying it now, but I would feel anxious playing games like 30 seconds. Because every time I didn't know a word, I felt like it proved how dumb I was. If someone said, "You don't know that," I just wanted to disappear. Like, that was so terrible. So to avoid that, I always pretended to understand and know what the other person was talking about, even if I didn't. Which would actually make me feel more dumb and more anxious that the other person would find out. Social gatherings were starting to feel like a test in which I had to prove myself in conversations. And I knew I had to get out of this vicious loop. So I leaned into a new strategy. I acknowledged that me not knowing something didn't mean that I was a failure, but that human beings sometimes just don't know stuff. It wasn't a me thing, it was a human thing. Instead of shaming myself when I didn't know something, I started treating it as a fact and not as a personal flaw. When someone used a word I didn't know or gave an explanation I didn't understand, I just tell them I don't know what that means and ask them to explain it to me. And the moment I admitted that I didn't know, the shame disappeared. To my surprise, people also seemed to enjoy explaining, and I was learning new things and getting smarter. Ironically, I also learned that a lot of the time, people also have no idea what they're talking about themselves or what the words they use even mean. Being kind and understanding towards myself when I didn't know something helped me to shift from a focus on shame and self-criticism to a focus on curiosity, growth, and self-acceptance. When you have the tendency to attack yourself, the way out is self-compassion and curiosity. It's about becoming aware of your struggle and acknowledging that suffering, failure, and imperfection are part of the shared human experience. Instead of drowning yourself in the isolating feeling that they are proof that you're just not good enough. Believe me, your entire life will change if you start approaching yourself with compassion and curiosity instead of shame and judgment. I want to end this video by telling you this. Shame feeds on the belief that there's something wrong with you, that if people really saw you, they'd reject you. But hiding those parts of yourself is what actually keeps the shame alive. Shame lives in the shadows. When you bring those parts of yourself into the light, when you talk about them, share them, own them, you'll see that most people are far more forgiving, loving, and human than your inner critic ever allowed you to believe. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who might need it too. Because all of us carry shame, but none of us should have to carry it alone.